And 3 dimensions is a cube. But could something have a dimension somewhere in between, say 2 and 3? Mandelbrot said yes. Fractals do. And the rougher they are, the higher their fractal dimension.
There are all of these technical terms like fractal dimension and self-similarity, but those are the nuts and bolts of the mathematics itself. What that fractal geometry does is give us a way of looking at, in a way that's extremely precise, the world in which we live, in particular the living world.
Mandelbrot's fresh ways of thinking were made possible by his enthusiastic embrace of new technology. Computers made it easy for Mandelbrot to do iteration, the endlessly repeating cycles of calculation that were demanded by the mathematical monsters.
The computer is totally essential. Otherwise, it's taken a very big, long effort.
Mandelbrot decided to zero in on yet another of the monsters, a problem introduced during World War I by a young French mathematician named Gaston Julia.
Gaston Julia, he was actually looking at what happens when you take a simple equation and you iterate it through a feedback loop. That means you take a number, you plug it into the formula, you get a number out. You take that number back to the beginning and you feed it into the same formula, get another number out, and you keep iterating that over and over again. And the question is, what happens when you iterate it lots of times?
The series of numbers you get is called a set, the Julia set. But working by hand, you could never really know what the complete set looked like.
There were attempts to draw it, doing a bunch of arithmetic by hand and putting a point on graph paper.
You would have to feed it back hundreds, thousands, millions of times. The development of that new kind of mathematics had to wait until fast computers were invented.
At IBM, Mandelbrot did something Julia could never do: use a computer to run the equations millions of times. He then turned the numbers from his Julia sets into points on a graph.
My first step was to just draw mindlessly a large number of Julia sets. Not one picture, hundreds of pictures.
Those images led Mandelbrot to a breakthrough. In 1980, he created an equation of his own, one that combined all of the Julia sets into a single image. When Mandelbrot iterated his equation, he got his own set of numbers. Graphed on a computer, it was a kind of roadmap of all the Julia sets, and quickly became famous as the emblem of fractal geometry. The Mandelbrot set.
They intersect at certain areas, and it's got like a,
And they have little curlicues built into them.
Black, beetle-like thing crawling across the floor.
Seahorses, dragons.
Something similar to my hair, actually.
With this mysterious image, Mandelbrot was issuing a bold challenge to long-standing ideas about the limits of mathematics.
The blinders came off, and people could see forms that were always there, but formerly were invisible.
The Mandelbrot set was a great example of what you could do in fractal geometry, just as the archetypical example of classical geometry is the circle.
When you zoom in, you see them coming up again, so you see self-similarity. You see, by zooming in, you zoom, 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 you're zooming in, you're zooming in, and pop. Suddenly it seems like you're exactly where you were before, but you're not. It's just that way down there, it has the same kind of structure as way up here, and the sameness can be grokked.
Mandelbrot's mesmerizing images launched a fad in the world of popular culture.
Suddenly this thing caught like a bushfire. Everybody wanted to have it.
I thought, this is something big going on. This was a cultural event of great proportions.
In the late 1970s, Jane Barnes had just launched a business designing men's clothing.
When I started my business in '76, I was doing fabrics the old-fashioned way, just on graph paper, weaving them on a little hand loom.
But then she discovered fractals and realized that the simple rules that made them could be used to create intricate clothing designs.
I thought, this is amazing. So that very simple concept, I said, oh, I can make designs with that. But in the 80s, I really didn't know how to design a fractal because there wasn't software.
So Barnes got help from two people who knew a lot about math and computers, Bill Jones and Dana Cartwright.
I had Dana and Bill writing my software for me. They said, oh, your work is very mathematical. And I was like, it is? That's my weakest subject in school.
We had a physicist and a mathematician and a textile designer.
We had so much to learn from each other.
I did not know what a warp and a weft is. You know, Jane, her ability with numbers is fairly restricted, if I can put that politely.
All the parameters here, there was a way we were going to communicate. We were going to get together somehow. And it really did happen pretty quickly. The general fashion press thought, Jane's a little nuts. They started calling me the fashion nerd, you know, but that was okay. That was okay with me because I was learning a lot. This was fun and very, very inspirational. I'm getting things that wouldn't be possible by hand. You know, sometimes when I think about things in my head and I say, you know, I just saw light coming through that screen door. And look at the moiraying effects that are happening on the ground. Can I go draw that? No way. But I can describe that to my mathematician. This kind of reminds me of... He sends me back the generator, all ready for me to try. And I sit down at the computer and say, well, let's see what it's doing. And I have parameters that I can control. And I keep pushing, and I go, wow, this is not what I expected at all. At all, but it's cool.
Use the Force, Luke.
The same kinds of fractal design principles have completely transformed the magic of special effects.
This is a key moment from Star Wars Episode 3, where our two heroes have run out onto the end of this giant mechanical arm. And the lava splashes down onto the arm. My starting point here is to actually take the three-dimensional model and take essentially a jet and just shoot lava up into the air. This looks kind of boring. It's doing roughly the right thing, but the motion has no kind of visual interest to it. Let's look at what happens here when I add the fractal swirl to it. Where this becomes fractal is we take that same swirl pattern, we shrink it down and reapply it. We take that, we shrink it down again, we reapply it. We shrink it down again, we reapply it. And from here on, it's just a case of layering up more and more and more. I've used the same technique to create these additional lava streams. I then do it again here to get some just red-hot embers. Then we take all of those layers and we add them up, and we get the final composite image. My hero lava in the foreground, the extra lava in the background, the embers, sparks, steam, smoke.
Designers and artists the world over have embraced the visual potential of fractals. But when the Mandelbrot set was first published, mathematicians, for the most part, reacted with scorn.
In the Mathematical Intelligencer, which is a gossip sheet for professional mathematicians, there were article after article saying he wasn't a mathematician, he was a bad mathematician, it's not mathematics, fractal geometry is worthless.
The eye had been banished out of science. The eye had been excommunicated.
His colleagues, especially the really good ones, pure mathematicians that he respected, they turned against him.
Because, you know, you get used to the world that you've created and that you live in, and mathematicians had become very used to this world of smooth curves that they could do things with.
There were clinging